Well, let's hop right into it. Hey guys, thank you so much for hopping on. This is the $100 million podcast. $100 million podcast guest of today is Justin. Justin, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Justin, give us your elevator pitch. Why should we listen to you? Who are you? And yeah.
Well, I guess for the last 10 years, I've been helping other founders and business people, startup or seasoned entrepreneurs just figure out what they want and build a life that they want to design, not just let life happen to them. And that's not because I've found some secret sauce as much as it's been that I've been kicked in the face from drug rehab to jail to nearly a 9-figure business that was all stolen from me. And then I had to fight my way through court to try to clear my name and pay back taxes. So I've been through some things, and my goal here is to help anyone listening here how to design a life that's exciting, that's fun, that they don't want to retire from, and not get kicked in the face while doing it so much like I did.
That's awesome. Well, we're excited to hear your story. And our goal is to take some different little business nuggets along the way that you have to share. But get you go ahead and start off about where you grew up and what was your first job like and how that grew you into the man you are today.
Yeah, I grew up in St. George, Utah, which is where I'm back in St. George now. It was a lot different then than it is now. The first job that I had was it was not very far that way. It was at a catering company. And I was probably 10 or 12. My friend's dad owned the company. And so we'd get to go work and make a few bucks. So that was kind of my first job. When I turned 12, it started to become more regular. And by 14, I was working 3 to 5 days a week. And we would cook in these big cast iron things called a Dutch oven. You ever heard of one of those? Okay. We would cook potatoes. And that was kind of like the signature dish. Well, dishes, there were several, but they were all cooked in this Dutch oven thing. So it was kind of like a Western thing. And it was kind of cool. It was a cool skill to have. It was dirty, smelly. Sometimes I remember cutting onions, for instance. We'd go outside to cut the onions for potatoes, but we'd feed like 1,000 people at a time. So you're cutting onions to go in Dutch oven potatoes. And I'm talking like 6 bags, 50-pound bags of just onions, and you just sit there and just bawling tears. You got to cut them up. So that was the first job, and it was not always fun. It was sometimes very early mornings. There were days that I remember my boss, who was an awesome guy, he'd be knocking on my bedroom window at 4:30 a.m. because I was still asleep, and we were supposed to be on the road to go to some meal we were going to prepare for somebody somewhere in the mountains or something. So that was job number one. Taught me a lot of responsibility and start to manage money and all those things. Just work ethic primarily, just really working for what I had at a young age. That was something that I guess more important than the job was how my parents dealt with that. Like at the time I didn't realize this, but now that I'm a parent and have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old, I realized my parents were freaking Jedi masters. They were good. And I had no idea at the time, but they let me go through some of these things and learn from experience things that I never would have listened to them. And I've not followed that good example that they've given me, where I try to explain things to my kids, doesn't really work, and I don't let them experience it as much. And then the lesson doesn't land, and it creates trouble downstream, sometimes tough trouble to get out of.
Man, that's crazy. That's crazy. So what were you getting paid back when you were doing that?
$3 an hour is what I started at. When I turned 14 and went more like officially part-time, I think it was 4. And then pretty soon after that, it got to be like 4.25. I was pretty stoked about that little bump.
And we'll come back to this story, but have you ever calculated how much you made an hour at your peak?
Yeah, I haven't been asked that for a long time, but yeah, substantially more. And it wasn't because I was sitting there calculating it. Actually, I had a meeting. I had a really good assistant at the time who was just completing his MBA, and he was my personal assistant, and he was phenomenal. Just had a meeting. It ran about 2 hours, and there was maybe 60 or 70 people that worked for me at the time in this meeting. It was an all hands meeting. And we're talking. I'm kind of frustrated trying to explain things, taking these questions from all these kind of different people. And he was a little bit of a Jedi master too. He came into my office with me after that. He's like, okay. He was pretty quiet, dude. He's like, well, that was interesting. Do you have any idea like how much that meeting cost you? And I was like, no, no, wait, what do you mean? It's like, well, just the payroll, like just the payroll itself. And so he whipped that up like 3.6 seconds. He has it on a spreadsheet and he turns it around and he shows me. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. And he's like, what's crazy is your time is actually more than that. I said, wait, what? How do you figure? I said, if you take your gross margin for what you bring in, a gross profit margin, divided by the number of hours that you work, your time itself more than doubles what everybody else in that room. So your total in that meeting, and it was thousands, tens of thousands of dollars for a meeting. And I was like, we accomplished about this much in that meeting. Our meetings changed dramatically from that moment on. Never again was it like that. So that was a really good experience that, once again, back to it wasn't somebody telling me that. It was him letting me experience it and actually see and translate in dollars what that actually came out of my bank account by having that 2 hour meeting.
That's crazy. Tell what, so it was like tens of thousands, like what was it in like the 50s or
Well, let's say that year was around this divided by 2080. My time was around $6,000 or $8,000 an hour at that time using that same formula. Okay.
oh my
So,
God.
and then we had, if we were at 200,000, and let's see, that would have been 2 weeks. So that's 80 hours, approximately 80, 86, 88. I mean, 2,500. So that meeting was probably in the neighborhood of $17,000 for a 2 hour meeting. 17,000 bucks with my time and my team's time.
That's crazy. Have you ever fathomed when you were back, doing that first job, did you fathom doing, $3 an hour that you were going to be doing 1,000 times that?
No, I mean not a chance. No.
Did you have goals and aspirations to like kind of head that, or like maybe like, oh, this is where I want to be, or you kind of feel like you fell into being successful, the route to be successful?
I did have goals. I wanted a bigger life. I wanted a bigger life than what I felt like I grew up in. Although it was a great, awesome environment, very loving, very fantastic parents and siblings and great family life. I wanted it to be bigger, and I did aspire for it to be bigger. But my journey is a tumultuous one. Like it's rocky, it's up and down. And when I came out of drug rehab and just committed, knowing more about myself than at any time in the previous 3 years, I forget how old I was exactly, 24-ish, knowing more about myself and having an awareness of who I am and what makes me tick. Like I had goals then, and I felt like they were the most clean, clear, concise goals that I've ever had in my life. They weren't just like wild pipe dreams of silliness. And within 2 years, just blew them out of the water. Like 10 to 25x what I thought I was going to do. When I started getting into, well, John, honestly, I just believe it's my calling. When I start behaving the way God had called me to live, I started seeing results that like I didn't have the capacity to comprehend or even dream that big prior to that. But when I got into that flow and I started being the person, doing the work, dealing with the challenges that I feel he put in my path for making me a better person. Wow. Like, man, I heard a quote yesterday and it was, your goals should be so big. I can't remember. I'm going to misquote it, but your goals should be so big that they require God to step in, because you'll hit your ceiling so fast that you need God's assistance in order to achieve your goals. And if they're not that big and you can put and that's what it was for me when I was 24, 25 years old. I was marking out everything in the path to attain those goals. And that's why they were man-made goals. They were man-sized goals. They were not God-sized goals. I've learned a lesson since then. I know better now. And I don't always have the how, but I know the what. And if you start with the what, then the how sometimes gets backed, you kind of back into it with grace and with some help and with and expand. You know, you were not the same as we were a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. So how could we fully know what God has in store for us 5 years down the road? It doesn't mean we don't try, we don't have plans, we don't have goals and aspirations, but we also need that feedback loop, that continuity of doing our best, reflecting, and doing our best, and then reflecting on that. And, you know, that never ends, I think.
Mm. What are some good healthy whats when you talk about whats?
Man, that depends on you, right? Like, I think that my belief is that the what's that motivate, inspire, and light me up, like that are a fire under me, I think those come from God. I think that's our motivator. Henry David Thoreau says it this way, like the beat of the drum that you hear in your heart, it's going to be a little different than the guy next to you. He has a different drum beat, and you should let him beat, like march to his beat, and you can march to yours, you know, and that's kind of what his writings are all about. But that's different from you to me. But I do believe, for instance, one of my what's is having multiple homes because I like the energy of new environments. Okay, now this might not be normal for everybody. And I know several people who think I'm super crazy and disruptive to my kids, that I like to pull them from one part of the country to another part of the country to spend time in these different environments. To me, that gives me energy. It gives me inspiration. It gives me clarity of thinking. That may be miserable to you. You know, I don't know. You may like that idea. You may want to take a page out of that book. But for me, I know that when I spend about 2 to 3 months in a location, and then I can change the location, that breath of fresh air and environment just reboots my thinking. And it actually makes my time feel like it slows down because I don't get in too much of that habitual mode of just, well, I get up and I do this and I do this. Like I told you before we got on here, this morning I went on a hike Tuesday mornings. I'm in this area. And I only do that in this area right now. Maybe in the future I'll do it in whatever area I'm in, but now this is where people know to meet me there, which is good, but I don't want to do that just because that's the way I always did it. You know, I want to do it because that's what makes sense to me now. So that's a what for me that I think gives me motivation. It gives me inspiration. And, you know, there also is now to have multiple homes requires a little bit more money. I mean, you gotta have some cash to fund those homes, and you have to have different things in place for that to happen. So I think those what's out there are a driver that then I can kind of back in the resources to that and become the person who can manage that. Does that make sense?
Do you feel like habits are like what are good habits and what are bad habits? I mean, I know everybody's different, and this is kind of you saying you like different environments to kind of re-engage creativity. Do you have any habits though that you like to keep wherever you live?
Yes, for sure. I know the power of bad habits too. too. I got a lot of those in the past, and probably still some in the present for sure to work on. But the habits that I know throughout all the ups and downs of my life that have always served me is prayer, meditation, like quieting my mind, and exercise, like fueling my body properly. You know, those are things that if I prioritize those things first and take care of, you know, I'm a bit religious and spiritual, and I believe that I have a lot of the thoughts that I think and these desires that I have come from a higher power. And they're here to give me kind of like omens and guideposts and signs and signals for how to live my life and what sort of contribution that I can bring back to others in this life. And the habits that I prioritize most are trying to stay clear enough so that I can see those signs and omens and read the signals. So meditation every morning, like that for me is a non-negotiable, because anytime I've made it negotiable, it stops. And anytime it stops, I get in my head too much and I start thinking and believing all the thoughts that I have. And sometimes I get some really crappy thoughts that are very limiting, that are very fearful, that are very negative. But when I meditate every day, at least once, I realize that my thought, like the stream of consciousness, is kind of out here, and I am the observer of that, and it allows me to keep an arm's length from some of that drama inside my head. And then I can just like, oh, that's just a thought, and it's over there, and I'm back here observing that thought, and it's not who I am. I can be something that watches that thought. And that sounds weird and kind of abstract, but anyway, that's all to say meditation is definitely one of those habits. And then I also know that taking care of my body fuels that. It's like the other side of the pancake of that one, right? The first one is my mind and spirit. The other one is my physical body, which houses those things. So when I let that slide, when I engage in drinking or other negative things that can sometimes have an effect and draw my body downward, it's harder to keep my mind and my spirit in alignment. And things just get fuzzy that way. You know, when things get fuzzy, instead of clarity and confidence, it's confusion and fear. And man, talk about the difference of those two worlds. If you're living in confusion and fear as opposed to living in clarity and a little more confidence, that's why those things are non-negotiable for me. I gotta keep them.
Yeah. What about family time? How do you balance family time and work time? Doing overtime work? How many hours do you need to put in? Is more hours better, or do you get at least less productive with those, extra hours so it doesn't even make sense sometimes?
Yeah, it absolutely doesn't make sense sometimes. And I don't always get that right. Sometimes I have a tendency to grab onto those things and just need to get done. But I think there's an element of good with that, but you can definitely get it carried away. Balance for family time is a little easier for me now. I mentioned my kids' ages. You know, when your kid's 15 years old, they're not wanting to hang out with you every minute of the day. I mean, that's my youngest. But it requires a different level of attention from me. Like I put probably between 1.5 to 3 hours a day into that relationship with my youngest right now, where he's not even in the room. So I'm doing things with ChatGPT. I'm talking to therapists and professionals because I want to help him navigate a tough chapter of his life so that when I show up in the hour a day, or maybe even it's an hour every 3 days because of his schedule going to practice here and that there, and we may not have a lot of time. I want that time to be impactful and meaningful. So I'll talk to a coach, I'll talk to a therapist, I'll talk to ChatGPT for as much as 3 hours in a day before that so that I get those few minutes right. Because it's, middle school and high school, like the beginning of high school, that's a tough stage for kids. And really important decisions are made in those early formative years that are identity-based decisions, right? Like who you identify as and with, and where you feel like you fit and belong, really carries the trajectory of your life from 15 to 25 years old as a young man usually. And once you get to 25, if you've got a lot of momentum pulling you one direction or another, it doesn't change direction that frequently. So like right now, I'm looking at this as the final stages of my highest level of influence and impact on that young man's life. So to me, balance, I don't try to necessarily balance it in terms of this number of hours here, as long as I get that, it's the impact that I can have. And that's a tough one. It is, it was different when my kids were 2, 6, those are different elements of different things. I do have a belief though, getting back to what is your time worth? That's been, since I learned that lesson, it's been a guiding force in my life. So I've used that again and again and again in the last 15 years, hundreds of times with my clients and people that I work with, and in my own life, to where I look at the exchange of time based on the impact that I can have. So let's say, for instance, my goal is to get in shape, and I know that one of the keys, in that process is meal planning and preparation. But that takes 2 hours every day. Am I willing to do that? Well, it's just a simple exchange of time and value. If I have the time, I've got nothing else to do, I don't have kids, they're all at the house, that might be a perfectly fine thing to do, unless I hate it. If I hate it, then I don't think that is a good use of my time, even if I have the time to spend, because I'm going to become frustrated and upset by that. So I'm using this example because it's one that I recently deployed in my life, I reached a level of fitness in my goals where I knew the next thing to unlock was just like solid meal prep so that I always had my meals planned in advance. Now, this is right next to me all times. This is my calories for the day. There's 2,150 calories in that box. So every day I have them there. The thing is, John, I did that for a couple days myself. Hated it. Like, I would get so pissed off slicing things and weighing them and putting them in containers. I recognized my kids would come in an hour into it and I was just a jerk because I was not enjoying it at all. And then I recognized, hey, this is one of those time equation moments right now, in this moment. I grabbed my phone, I put it on a tripod, and started filming me doing the rest of the meal prep, and I got a lot happier, and I talked my way through it. And then the next day, I had one of the team members put on Facebook Marketplace that I was looking for somebody to come over and be a helper in my house. And for $15 an hour, I have somebody come over 2 or 3 times a week. They cook the food, they cut the food, they prep the food, they put it in bags, boxes, and containers, and it's all sectioned off inside of my fridge. And that's problem solved. Cost me $150 a week, maybe, to get that all done. Maybe, you know? And I have 0 parts of that preparation process. Like 0. And it just gets better with time because I can improve the playbooks with time. I can improve the process with time. But initially, just instantly right off my plate. So now, back to your balance question. To me, that feels more like balance than sitting there fighting through a task that I don't like to do. I feel like I don't have the time to do, but yet I have this inner pull that I want to get better. I want my fitness to go up. I want my health to improve. It feels important to me, but yet there's this struggle over here. A lot of us just think that's the way it is, when I'm here to maybe suggest that there's an alternative. Maybe there's somebody in your neighborhood that could use 10 or 15 bucks an hour that would be happy to come over and cook, or just cut it up and weigh it, measure it, put it in boxes and Tupperware and whatever, and then you're set to go.
What are some like ways that you found in business that you kind of see like, oh man, I've been wasting so much time of my time when this easily could have been delegated?
Yeah, let's stay with that same premise then for a sec. One of my clients was running an agency, and she was your typical entrepreneurial stereotype. Very creative, really good at sales, really good at relationship building, visionary, very bad with clerical stuff, very bad in organization, financials. She hadn't looked at them in maybe ever. Taxes were behind, like these kind of things. She was employing, I believe at the time, 7 people, if memory serves. I was talking to her about where we could look for some efficiencies and how to grow and scale. Because a lot of people, they start a business with this idea and they have a passion, they start building it, and then they reach this point where that business becomes a bit like a prison to them, right? Like, is that ever a theme that you hear about? Like they just feel trapped, kind of stuck? Okay. And that's kind of the impetus of your question, it feels like. Like, where in business do you feel like you're wasting time, you're not efficient with your time? And that feeling comes from, oh, why am I doing this? This sucks. You feel that tension or that resistance, that pressure. So I'm talking to her and I'm trying to see, like, what do you do with your time? How do things work in the operation? What's going on? And what does this team member and that team member do? And then she says something to me. She says, well, yeah, when I was here on Saturday cleaning the office, I did this. And I went, hang on, whoa. You were in there on Saturday? Tell me about that. She's like, well, yeah, I usually just come in on Saturday. I take out the garbages. There's nobody here. I can wipe down the desk every couple of times. I just clean everything off and dust and do this. So, well, how many hours were you there? And maybe it was 5 or something. And so I did the same thing that my assistant did to me many, many years before. I said, let's take a look at your financials. Okay, so year to date, here's your gross profit margin. Means you're the only one in your business that generates revenue. In her case, this was the case. Like, she had no salespeople, no account representatives, business development. She did all that. So all revenue I attributed to her, and then took the cost of goods sold, subtracted that out, and said, here is your gross margin. Now let's divide that by the number of hours there are in a year, and that's around 2,080. And in her case, it was $400 and something. I said, so you spent 5 hours in the office on Saturday. Your rate is $400 an hour. She's kind of walking through that process with me. And I said, do you think in Los Angeles, where your office is, that you maybe could find somebody to come and give you some janitorial services for, say, 20, 25 bucks an hour? She's like, obviously, there's about 1 million people that would do that. I said, do you think that they could do as good of a job as you? She said, yeah, probably better. I said, okay, I would agree. And do you think that you would be hurting them and their families by giving them that opportunity to come and work in your office? She's like, well, I'm sure there's people that would be like hugely grateful for that. I said, totally. Now, do you think that you could spend those 5 hours doing something to either fill your tank and get some feedback, like go meditate, go to the spa, get your nails done, whatever it is that kind of puts gas in your tank that gives you energy, and or something that you could do that brings in more revenue in those 5 hours? And she immediately was like, I haven't been to the spa on this, and I have my nails done. And she started going off this whole thing of all the frustrations that she felt. And we just changed her paradigm. She never cleaned the office again. Her revenue went up huge amounts, and within 1 year, she sold the company for millions of dollars. Because she was the glue. She was literally the bottleneck in everything that was going on, because she just didn't understand what her time was worth. And through that little exercise, she started to see things differently and realized she had some skills that nobody else in that office could replicate easily. And I call that pulling the big levers, like the $100,000 levers. She could go land a new account that brings in 10 grand a month profit, month over month over month over month, and nobody else could. So if she did things that kept like that gas in her tank, as I mentioned, she would be more apt to have that enthusiasm and that zeal and that passion to go out and land another deal.
That's awesome. I totally see that, and I've seen that in so many times, and sometimes I do it to myself and I don't even realize it. And it's a good refresh to like kind of sit down, write down what is my task look in a day. I had one of the guys that kind of helped me out with things is I take a Google Calendar, and every 30 minutes I write down what I did this past 30 minutes. And then sometimes you embarrass yourself a little bit, like, oh, I spent 30 minutes scrolling on, something when I was supposed to be looking up research on how to create something, but on YouTube I
Yep.
ended up getting distracted.
Yeah.
Something like that. And it's like, man, look how much I'm like, oh, there's not enough time in the day, and it's either tasks that I've been doing that easily could be handed off to somebody else, or it's time wasted by talking. Not, I wouldn't say talking to my wife is time wasted. Let me take that back. But, sometimes the wife calls and it ends up taking 30 minutes.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Stuff like that. And I think that's like so helpful to just understanding like how to maximize the time. I feel like that's a really good conversation. I kind of want to keep on doing that. What are some different ways that we can maximize our time in the week?
Well, I think if you don't know where you have to have an awareness. So I like what you just said is a big unlock for people if they're not doing that. And that's doing a little bit of an assessment or an auditing of their time. And don't let that weird word scare you. It's just being aware and jotting something down. And you can't do it after the fact. Like you can't get to Saturday and then document where your week went. You got to do it in real time. And 30 minutes is about as far away from the actual time being spent that I would ever let it go. And so that's step one. Step two is to see where are the things that give you energy as opposed to the things that take energy away, right? There's a lot of things, like you may see scrolling as something that gives you energy because that's where you find podcast guests and that's how you get business ideas. Sure, there's some dopamine going on there and there's people really engineering, trying to keep you on that platform. So you got to be careful with that. But if it gives you energy and lights you up, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. It just means you need a container and some discipline and some structure to it, right? So I first identify the things that just absolutely suck. And then of those things that absolutely suck, like meal prep, what is below your pay grade? And so if you don't know your pay grade, then you got to calculate that. And you do that depending on, if you get paid a W-2 wage or getting a paycheck, it's pretty easy to calculate what your time is worth. So you can take like 50% of that as an easy calculation. Say, look, if I'm getting paid $100 an hour on my job, anything that I can get done for $50 an hour out in the marketplace, it's probably a better use of my time to go hire somebody else to do it. But that's considering, again, you don't get enjoyment doing it. So for instance, I used to mow my lawn. And I liked mowing my lawn. And it wasn't a good use of my time with economics, right? Like the math didn't pencil out. I could hire somebody to do it cheaper than my time was worth. but I liked it. I put in AirPods and I jumped on the mower, and it was a riding mower, and I get to cruise around the yard and totally tune. It was a big yard. It was multiple acres, and it was out in Vermont, and that's where I would mow, and I've got to mow around the trees and all this stuff. It'd take me about 2.5, 3 hours usually to mow the lawn, but it didn't require problem solving. It just required being present. And then I got to the end, and I got to look back at the whole yard and be like, I did this. So I decided that was something for me to keep because it didn't suck. I liked doing it until I didn't. And then there became a time when I stopped liking doing that. And that's when I realized that friction, that feeling, I had to evaluate that. I looked at my time capacity. I looked at the level of enjoyment or return that I got back from that activity and said, nah, I'm going to let you guys mow from here on out. Nah, I don't want to anymore, because I was in a different stage. And so as things change, you've got to be able to evaluate processes like that and then move them forward. So I do that, John, every year. I take a real deep look into my calendar. I do this with my wife. We go away and we get a hotel room, and I have a big calendar that's like 6 feet by 4 feet, and I staple it to the wall of the hotel room, and we stay in there for a week. We usually go somewhere fun, and like we went to St. Thomas, and so we get some time to go to the beach and kind of mix up our creativity and have some time together to connect. But the goal is to spend 7 to 10 days there, sort of ejected from our normal stimuli and our normal situation, to say, what is it that we want to accomplish this year? What are the big things? What's going on in our kids' lives? And what should we change? Because if the calendar looks like it did last year, we're going to be living, like by very definition, it's going to feel very much the same. We're not going to be really making progress, so we make some changes based on that calendar. It's a really good exercise that I recommend to everyone. It gets us on the same page. It gets things kind of sorted out, and we know really what some of the bigger priorities are for the year. So back to the equation, you figure out what your time is, you figure out what sucks, what doesn't suck, and then you see what you can get rid of. And in business, if you're doing this as a business owner, you got to make sure that, let's say you get 10 hours a week back because you found some things that suck your energy, you found some things you can hire and give away to somebody else that's going to be more cost effective than you. Then you need to decide, what am I going to do with the time, right? Because now you got this time. If you're going to you got to remember, first and foremost, if you give it to somebody else, there's going to be a time that you need to manage that within somebody else. And that's what a lot of people miss. So budget, literally in your week, 30 minutes now to oversee what that process is supposed to be yielding. Or in other words, inspect what you expect from that delegation, right? So now we're down from 10 hours to 9.5. We're still way ahead, right? Then what am I going to do with the other 9.5 hours? I would say, number one, find something that will bring you in more revenue, that will bring back, that will pay in spades, so that you reward yourself for delegating that with higher income, more revenues, etc. And number two, do something that lights you up. Do something that, maybe that's the massage once a month that you go get. Maybe it's you leave on Fridays early and go play baseball with your kid, something that you've been missing. And that's how I restore that balance word. It's less about an equation as much as it is, if I'm doing things that light me up and I'm not getting sucked into tasks that I think somebody else could do just as good as me, or if not better than me, then I usually stay pretty much in balance because of this daily process where I reflect, I meditate, I get quiet, and I try to stay connected to my creator.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit more about this calendar, and what are some practical ways, if our calendar maybe is not as as big and complex as yours, because you're in a different life stage, and maybe somebody that's their business is smaller and stuff like that, and there's a lot more like involved in the business as we start delegating things as the business grows. Tell me about kind of like how to start that calendar, and what things need to be in there.
Sure. So I would say the concept and the premise is exactly the same. That even if you're just starting out, if it's your first or second year in business, if you're only at just barely cracking 6 figures of gross revenue, you can still do the same thing. Maybe you don't go away on some crazy vacation to do it, but you can still put up the calendar at the end of the year and find some time to prioritize what's most important next year. So usually this starts, John, in my household, in my process, I always start with my kids and my family. And that's how I make sure that I stay in balance and I don't get imbalanced is the first thing that goes on my calendar this year. The first thing was my son's high school graduation. So that's the first, that calendar's blank, right? Just all these squares. And I looked that up on the school's website and I marked the time and then I blocked the next few days out. And then from that, we got into what are the things that he's doing. He's going to be playing baseball here. He's going on this senior trip with his friends here. Started adding those things to the calendar. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily, some of them have nothing to do with me other than just to be aware, but it's an intention that my wife and I set at the beginning of the year, before the year starts usually, that what our focus, it's sort of like the hinges of the year go around this event. Nothing is going to supersede that accidentally, right? Last year, for instance, was my daughter's college graduation. So it was on the East Coast and everybody else was on the West Coast. So that was the first set of dates. Like everything gets governed by this. So that makes it really easy because now the decisions can have alignment with that as the primary motivation. So that was, sometime in early to mid-May last year. So that being our number one priority, when my son comes to me in February and says, hey, can I do this thing with baseball and sign up to this team and do this and this? It's like, nope, that conflicts with, we're all going back east. Well, when? On these dates and these dates. And it adds clarity so that the water doesn't get muddied in, well, we'll try and we'll do this. And so it just helps you keep decision alignment. And it might seem like it's a big deal or my calendar is more complicated or more complex or there's more to it, but it's really about simplicity. It's keeping things simple so that I don't get decision fatigue 700 times throughout the year. It's like, no, that's the number one thing. If it conflicts with any of the things that are already there as priorities, the answer is a no. But the cool part about it, my mother passed away last year as well. And the cool part about the calendar is because it was all there, I was able to turn things off, shut things down, be totally present with her in her last moments, be totally present to work through the funeral, to work through the speech that I wanted to give to honor her. I mean, I spent 80 to 100 hours writing that speech and I wanted it to be so perfect because she was, and that without that kind of clarity, there's no way. I would have tried to sneak something in. I would have tried to make it work. But instead, I had that calendar there. And even in those unplanned moments that that obviously wasn't on my calendar. But because everything else was, it was an easy shift here, move this, change that, cancel those few things. This is my focus now. And that's just the way it's going to be. And so it gives you that clarity. And I think more than clarity is decision alignment. And that is huge because it takes a lot of calories to make decisions. You got to burn a lot. And so we avoid it. Our brains are like, save that one for later. That one's hard because it does require burning energy and our brains are designed to conserve that energy. So when you can get clear on what the priorities are. So again, I think this is just as applicable. You got a business that's doing $100,000 a year. Same thing. What's our goal? If there's family goals to bring in, you prioritize those so that they don't get left behind and ignored. What are the business goals? Is there 2 conferences that you want to go to? Put them on the calendar. Are they going to move the needle on the business? Put them there first. Start planning around that. You'll be way more prepared to go. You'll block some time after you get back to actually leverage it. And instead of the tail wagging the dog, you're actually wagging the tail and setting the intentions for what's going to be important and have the flexibility to move things when you need to.
I love that. And so how do you fit, and I love that you put family first, probably family trips, like when are we going to spend time as a family, birthdays, what birthdays are we doing, what birthdays is like a maybe kind of a thing for like distant friends or family, all that good stuff. And then how do you kind of go about, okay, I don't want my business this year to be stagnant. I want it to grow and I need to have certain decisions. Do you have certain dates? I want to reach a goal by this date and I need to do this, that, and the other every single week in order to achieve that goal. There's many different ways to cut the cake, but tell us about some of the best ways that you found very successful on how to achieve your work goals throughout the year.
Yeah, so there is a little bit of overlap in that calendar exercise and the question you just asked. So if there are, say it's events or trips or client relationship meetings you need to have, if those are going to be needle moving and you know that, hey, that's going to add revenue to my business, then yes, throw them on the calendar, prioritize them so they're scheduled, so that they're sacred-ish, so they're blocked and that that's a priority. The rest, the other part of your question, I think, comes down to the standards that you keep. Now, I blend these two together. I get ready for this trip with my wife by spending a little bit of time reviewing last year and looking at my calendar. And then I tell my assistant, like, get ready. When I come back from this trip, the calendar's going nuclear. Like, everything changes. Nothing. So we have all these recurring appointments that by the end of the year, by November, December, there's recurring gym stuff. There's recurring podcast calls. There's there's all kinds of crap. The team meetings and this meeting and that meeting and these things. It slowly sneaks in. And now I have a whole week full of noise. So every year I kind of do a nuclear reset. And like he right now is he's still, it's February 17th and he is still trying to, maybe 2 weeks ago, he finally started to let go of the last couple of recurring appointments that take place. But he just kept thinking, well, I'm not going to get rid of the gym because you always go to the gym. You go to the gym every single day. So I should keep that there. I'm like, but no, you have to delete it because I don't know if I'm going to go to the gym at 9, 10, 11, 12. If I get stuck at going at 10:30 like I did for the better half of last year, then guess what else is going to be habitual next year? A lot of other things. So we've got to be able to mix it all up so that we're open to a new sort of architecting a new outcome. So back to the business. Once you identify the key targets with your calendar that you need to hit, conferences, business trips, etc., and you've already, assuming you've taken care of the family and the real priorities first, then you get into what are the standards that I need to look at. So last year, I'll kind of look at financials and say, we brought in this. What are the things that I did? Well, it's all in my calendar now. I can look backwards historically and say, this is how I spent my time. So what do I need to do now to spend this time going forward? Usually we have some ideas. Sometimes there'll be some gaps in those ideas where we may need a coach, we may need some outside input. That's why I like to always read. I like to go to events because it kind of stimulates my thoughts and ideas and gives me different things to think about and consider. But now it's not as much about scheduling as it is making sure there's space to hold the standard. Do you need to make more sales calls? Like, did your revenue slump in Q4 last year because you stopped taking sales call and you tried to delegate that? So maybe a new standard is, which you can put on the calendar, but as long as it doesn't matter what time of day that goes in, that's less important than the standard of I put 2 hours a day, every single day into sales calls. So that I look at, I have a list, I have 10. I have 10 things for this year that are kind of like my guiding list. And the way I like to do it is I put a shortcut on my phone screen right here where you hit that shortcut and it takes me right to my goals and calling list. And from there, that's my top. I got 10 things that I focus on. I read that 5 times every single day. I do it in the first thing in the morning, right before, and then right after I meditate. And that helps me to stay focused and reminded on, oh yeah, I need to put this many hours today into this. I need to spend some time working on these initiatives, these standards. That's what it really boils down to, I think, John, is if you want to move the needle on that, then you have to allocate time and you have to determine what the standards are. So again, I'll go back to the fitness example. When I worked out for years, I've always had some level of fitness and health, but I was pretty pudgy, soft around the middle, right? And my kids are the ones that kind of fired me up on this, and they just kept sort of poking at me and saying, well, when are you going to track all your calories? Because that's the reason you go to the gym every day, you do cardio every day, you have a great resting heart rate, you have all these things, but how many calories did you eat? I'm like, I don't know, like a decent amount, And so they convinced me to track my calories and to try that. And when I did that, I realized where I was going off the rails. With that awareness, I then went to outside input. Like I found people that were way better at that than me, nutritionists, health coaches, fitness coaches. And I said, what should I be eating? Where should I be? What's the ideal weight? And I started to learn things that I didn't know before that. Like, don't eat fats around your workout. Eat protein, prioritize that. You got to go way up in protein, and then you got to hit carbs right before workouts and have this many carbs, this many protein grams, and all these things. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, now I have a new standard. And so in my case, it's 200 grams of protein a day. So I have to hit that no matter what. Now, I learned real quick that if I don't wake up in the morning and first thing start thinking about protein, it's really freaking hard to hit 200 grams of protein. Alternatively, if I get up and I walk into the kitchen and I make a protein shake and I get 25 grams of protein down before I'm even fully conscious, I can coast into 200 every single day. So that's less about how I build my calendar as much as it is what is the standard that I'm going, not what am I going to try for. What's the standard? If protein 200 grams is a standard, then I got to hit it no matter what. And I've gone through different phases where, again, another fitness sort of plateau that I hit was body fat. And I kept finding out from all this outside input that it was the number of steps I was taking. So I set a standard, 20,000 steps a day. Holy cow, that's a lot. I had no idea how hard that was going to be. It takes a long time to get 20,000 steps. And I can't tell you how many nights, John. I gave it 100 days. Said I'm going to do it 100 days because anything I try, I do for at least 100 days. Because you don't get lagging indicators before that oftentimes. I don't know how many times I was going for a walk at 11 o'clock at night when I'm usually way asleep. And I'm like, mother effer, man. I got to go outside and go for a walk and it's 10:30 because I'm only at 15,000. So I'm walking from 10:30 to midnight to hit those other 5,000 steps. But if it's a standard, it's what you do. If it's hope, you just say, oh, I'll probably get there tomorrow.
What are some standards in business that you see move the needles for most businesses? That's like trackable, kind of like that, like something that kind of.
Yeah, it's usually sales. It depends on the size of the business and where you're at, what you're currently. So there's this cool book, The Goal, I think it's called. It is some required reading at some of the C levels in Amazon. There's a theory in that book described the theory of constraints. And in that theory, it's basically the gist of it is don't focus in areas of the business where things are going well. So if we use like a manufacturer metaphor, let's say you're building cars and you build tires, you build engines, and you build chassis. There's these three major components so that the deliverable at the end of the day is a car. That's how you make money. So if you're doing 6 sets of wheels every day, wheels and tires, and you're doing 5 engines every day, and that's your production quotient, right? That's what you're hitting. But in the chassis, you're only delivering 1 a day. Your constraint is clearly chassis. So that book is arguing it's completely foolish and a waste of time to spend any of that time in the wheel department or in the engine department. What are you doing? Go to the chassis department and spend all of your time there and figure out what the blockage is there. So I would say that is your guiding principle. I live by that. I love that idea and that concept. So when you ask a question, what are some of the guiding principles in business to help you unlock some of that leverage? Follow the theory of constraints. What do you not get enough of right now? Is it leads? If you don't have enough leads, anything else you spend time on is a waste of your time. Because without enough opportunities, it doesn't matter if you spend 2 hours a day in sales. To whom? You need opportunities to do the sales. So you focus all that energy on leads. As soon as you solve that problem, you're going to have an abundance of leads. And then the next likely problem you're going to have is sales. Okay, now jump into sales, solve that problem. But that's typically, so that's kind of a framework that I would say is useful that anybody can deploy right here, right now and say, wait a minute, where am I really stuck? Because as entrepreneurs, we like to complicate things. We come up with these crazy, complex ideas and schemes. That's how we come up with business ideas too. So it's not always negative, but sometimes we bring those traits into our day-to-day work days, and that does create a negative pull on us. But if we use that theory of constraints to sort of offset our entrepreneurial nature, it helps us to get locked in on what's actually needing attention. And then, I mean, here's my favorite. Spend the first 2 hours of every day on that problem. That's what I do. Like, as soon as I get done with my meditating and everything else, that is kind of like my morning rituals. That first 90 to about 90 minutes or so to 2 hours, that's it. I focus on the constraint. Once I'm done with that 2 hours, then I can move on and deal with it. Because it's not like you can live in a bubble. You're running a business. You're going to have customer service calls. You're going to have employee issues. You're going to have, all kinds of stuff to deal with. But if you prioritize that, prior, before, right? If you do the before the noise of everything else, then some of those distractions, or even if your wife calls you later on, or if you kind of get sucked into scrolling for a little while, the wheels don't fall off the bus. You can still win the day, even though the day goes a little sideways on you later on in the afternoon.
Mm, I love that. I love that. Tell me about with all the client experience you have. I know you have a lot of experience with it when it comes to sales and leads. For your business, what's the best way that you've found to generate leads?
What we do is we've tried to get into paid ads and different things. That's, you can get in front of a large amount of people, and everybody is on social platforms, so it's a good way to get those opportunities in front of you. Um, I like the idea of organic for me because it gives a better, when people resonate with a message and they say, hey man, I like that framework, that thing worked out for me, that tends to be a better customer for us to work with, somebody that's more aligned with our style and our message. And I heard an interesting quote today in something I was listening to in the gym where somebody was bitching and complaining about their customers and their clients or just a pain in the butt. And the guy said to him, wait, you're self-employed. So why do you have problematic clients? You get to decide who you work with. And sometimes we just get caught in these cycles where we're taking paid ads, we have to hit numbers. So everything is really, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting paradigm, like that I've experienced some of that where we're trying to force numbers and push things when in reality, if we just sit back and talk about how to solve problems, and I think that applies to agencies too. If you can talk about how to solve those problems and you help people get results in advance, they are going to trust you and want to work with you. And if they find you because of the stages you've been on or the content that you're creating and the problems you're solving out there for free, they're definitely going to be interested in hiring you to solve a bigger problem faster, better for them than what they just learned from the video they watched.
What about sales? Give me some advice on actually like closing deals, getting somebody in front of you and actually closing it.
Definitely, to make sales and to close sales effectively, the higher level of trust that you can build and the rapport that you can create with the prospect, the better off you're going to be. A couple of rules to keep in mind with that I like to remember is follow a process. If you think you can just wing it, and I don't care if you're the owner of the company and you can do this in your sleep, you should have a process. And you will get, even if that's all true and you don't have a process and you create one, your sales will go up. Because you'll identify, even reviewing your own, just like winging it sort of mentality, you'll see these different inflection points. And not only will your sales go up, but you'll also be able to delegate that task at some point when you document and reduce it to a process. So follow a process, don't just wing it. Treat it like a profession, be serious about it. Definitely build rapport, definitely build trust with the prospect. There's something that I heard Jeremy Miner, I think, say, that looking at sales as something you do for someone as opposed to something you do to someone. Are you really there to solve a problem? If you're there to solve somebody's problem and you're confident that you're able to solve that problem, you have an obligation to sell that person if they have their problem, right? If they've identified and showed you, I got this problem, and you're sitting there as the salesperson saying, holy shit, that's the problem that I solved, then you need to be good enough that you can take them through that sales journey. And it doesn't mean telling more, it's not about rattling off more bullet points and what features that you have. It is creating that trust, and it's showing them a future version of their lives that the problem is gone and that you have been the catalyst to help them get there. And that changes sales from something I do to someone to something I do for them. And so that mechanically often comes down to this gap, right? There's this current state, desired state. Stretch that open. Show them the path that if you want to get from here to here, the way you do that is through me, and it's following our proven system, A, B, C, D. And then be ready to overcome objections. And if you've done this for a while, if you're the entrepreneur, the founder, you know what the objections are. You've heard them 1,000 times. Start getting ahead of them. Like, put that into part of your rapport building and your relationship building, because they're going to come. Just because 2 out of 10 people don't have those objections doesn't mean you can't preempt them in advance anyway and say, yeah, and sometimes this and this tends to happen. So this is how we deal with that. And you do that way in advance of even creating that gap. So now that it actually builds more trust, it makes people feel more comfortable because you get them. You get the concerns that they were about to have, maybe even before they had them. So then when they start getting close to this gap, which is, it's a bit uncomfortable, right? It's transformation and it's change. So if you're selling and you're selling a solution, that definition, another way to define that is to make a change. And to make that change, we resist. Like our brains, that reptilian part of our brains says, stay the same, conserve energy, live, survive, right? We're not cavemen anymore, though. So we don't need to worry about those kinds of threats. So now we're looking to build a life that is more desirable, more, less problems, more rewards. And to do that, we have to go through changes. So there's the back part of our brain that's like, no, don't change. But there's this cortex saying, hey, let's reach for the stars. Let's go out here. If you're a world-class salesperson, you can take people on that journey and show them that working with you, working through that fear, working through those concerns will get them that transformation that they're after.
Of course, like I would say, the best education is actually doing it, getting the reps in and stuff like that. But do you have any sources that you like as far as like books or trainings that you like for sales?
I don't think that there's a limit on what you should be putting into yourself as far as self-improvement. And with the caveat being, don't trick yourself into thinking just consuming more and more is going to make you better. You actually have to put use, like you have to balance that with actual reps, like you said. But yeah, I love reading. And so now to get my steps in, I read on an iPad on a treadmill. So I link things together. That's one way that I found for me, no net added time increases both activities. So I'll get more steps and I'll do more reading because I've linked those two priorities together. And now I just get more of both, right? Because it's not a net addition of time spent on either one. It's like getting a twofer, right? So I also do a lot of meetings on the treadmill too, because I can get through a quick meeting on a Google Meet. That's a good way to kill some time there. So I read. That to me is a real high leverage form of learning because I can distill, like you can take a book that's this thick, which is somebody's entire life history, like their whole experience, and they've put blood, sweat, and tears to reduce it into a book, and you can read it in a couple weeks, like without too much trouble. So that is high leverage to me. Coaching, for sure. That's what led me through my journey is when I was at a point in my business where hustle got me to a really good result. I was bringing in 300 grand approximately a year. I was proud of myself for doing it. I'd paid off a bunch of credit card debt and stuff from my formative years that, some of the mistakes that I had made. But I was working 20 hours, maybe 3 days a week, like as much as I could muster. I knew that to keep growing, like physically was impossible. I was at the work/sleep maximum that I could hit. So I literally didn't know what to do. And the only thing that I came up with is I know a guy and he's smart. He runs a bunch of different businesses. I don't think he's working his balls off like I am. I should call him. And I did. And what was crazy about that is I called him on a random day out of the blue, just, hey, I got this thing, I told you I was starting a thing a while ago and it's doing pretty good. I was just wondering if I need some help, man. Do you have a minute sometime? And he's like, yeah, let's go to lunch. I said, cool. What works for you? He's like, how about now? And I was like, wow, how does this guy who's worth millions of dollars, who's running, he's got hundreds of employees, how can he just at the drop of a hat go to lunch? And that just burned into my brain. And then I went and had lunch with him that day, right then, right there. And he scratched on the back of the napkin some of the things that I was doing and kind of gave me some direction. And I realized by me looking up ahead, I kind of use a mountain climbing metaphor. Here I was like maybe 1,000 feet from, just barely up the little bit of the mountain. I saw him way up there and I got his attention and he came back down and grabbed me and he's like, I've already been there. Here, follow, look, there's my footsteps. Let's go. I can take you there faster. And he did. And he started teaching me things about my time. He started teaching me things like I was about to hire a bunch of people. I was thinking of hiring a bunch of people. And he's like, whoa, hold on. Before you do that, like we got to figure out where your time's going. And he started talking to me about just bringing somebody in that could take off some of the admin work, and started showing me how much time I was actually putting into that and how much money it was costing me. And it totally changed my paradigm 180 degrees. That simple change, like that was in like October, November of one year. And then I was at 300,000, right? Mind you, by the next end of April, so about 5 or 6 months later, I'd cleared my first $1 million in profit. I mean, it accelerated so fast. And then the next million came a month later, John. Like it was the compound return. Like here, I was just going to grind, try to work harder, harder, harder. And he says, wait, no, hang on. There's a few key ideas that you don't have them wrong. You have them out of order. So I was telling him, I need to hire this person. I need to hire this person. And he said, hang on. Let's first get some of these things in place. And what that showed me how to do is it created a sequencing issue with me that I started getting some of those reps in as well. And it changed. As a matter of fact, I have it's a delegation priority pyramid that I've put together now 25 years later from that lunch meeting, based on that meeting and everything that's happened since then. And it's what I use with my clients. And if anybody here listening finds that that might be helpful for them, it's a Google playbook. It's like 3 pages. Like you follow that. What it does is it shows you how the sequencing of things. I don't know how many times I talk to people that are like, I think I'm just going to hire a bunch of salespeople, because they're seeing revenue as the problem. Or like your question, like what if we have a leads problem? What do we do? It's sequencing. You've got to, the right thing at the wrong time is catastrophic, right? But if you can get the timing and the thing right, and most entrepreneurs, they have intuition when it comes to the thing. The timing and the sequencing is not intuitive. In fact, it's often counterintuitive. So again, if that's something that would be helpful, I'd be happy to share with anybody here listening. Just come over and ping me on Instagram, and I'll send you the Google playbook, the Google Doc link. And no obligation, nothing. I don't need anything from you. Just come and DM me the word pyramid over there on Instagram, and then I'll know that you heard me here. You can have the link. But that's when it comes time to learn, back to your question. So I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but the learning and the education, we are so habitual, and we get into these patterns and these habits and these routines. And I look at learning as a way to prevent me just living my same life on repeat. And I don't want to live 1 year 40 times. I want to live 40 more years. I want each of those years to stack and to get better and better and have different experiences and outcomes. And when I read books, it helps to change those thoughts and help me set different goals. When I go to conferences, I get to meet new people, hear new speakers, learn about new things. So those are some of the highest leverage things. And then if I have a particular goal, fitness, I've talked a lot about. If I want to get in shape, I go find the people that are in shape that say, hey, I can get you there faster. So I'm further up ahead that mountain than you are. So come and talk to me. I'll show you how to get your macros dialed, your routines dialed, your standards set. And then now I know what to do, and I'm eliminating 80% of the guesswork.
I love that. What are some ways that you have found best to get in contact with some of these like mentors? If maybe people don't have the connections like you you were doing well, 300,000 a year, you had some connections.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was back in 2005-ish. There was no Instagram then. I think Instagram makes it so much easier these days. So it depends on the goal. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're just looking for general mentors, that might be a little tougher. And that's where I would say find business conferences and workshops that you could go to, because there are great speakers and teachers out there. If you find somebody that you resonate with, I think a DM through Instagram is a great way to reach out. However, I heard a guy talk about this. I heard Sam Gaudet, who is a content creator, a creative director for a massive personal brand online. And he said, if you're going to do this, and I love this idea, because a lot of people are lazy about that. They're like, man, I really would like a mentor. And so they go to somebody, they get through in the DM, but their question was, can you help me be successful? That's a terrible question. There's no, what are you going to, my nephew saw me in the gym a little while ago. He's 23. And he comes up, it's a Sunday, and I usually on Sunday I take a little longer. I kind of stretch it out. I have more time, and I like to do some different things, and I just get in a different rhythm. And he's like this. He's got his AirPods in both ears, and he sees me, and he kind of nods his head like this, and then he takes one out and starts walking like he's coming towards me with purpose, right? I can tell. And he's like, "Oh, hey, yo, man, what's up, dude? It's good to see you. Hey, just real quick. So, what should I do to be successful, man? Like, I'm doing okay, but I want to take it to the next level. What do you think I should do?" And I just thought that's not a one ear pod out kind of question. You know that there's a there's a lot to that, and that's gonna take unpacking. Like, what do you mean? Where are you at? What do you want to be successful doing? All these things. But it put a lot of burden on me to try to answer that question. And most people, especially in a DM, you're not going to have some big influential person out there just start to unpack this whole thing, right? On the other hand, if you come with a very precise, narrow question that shows that you've already tried AI, you've already done research, you've already put some reps in and you've got some results, and now you're just wondering, how do I get over this little hurdle on my way to this? And it's a thoughtful question. John, I would venture to say that like 9 out of 10 of the people you reach out to will respond to you in that case. Like even the biggest names, like I was a big fan of Tony Robbins, so I went and got advice directly from Tony Robbins when I was 21 years old, like a long time ago. Like these people they're in that space because they like that. But what they don't have time for at this stage is general, broad, lazy, questions that don't even really have like, how do you answer that kind of a question?
Mm. Yeah, I always tell like I have like family and they're young, getting out of high school and stuff. And even in high school, they'd like ask me questions or they have like these really cool connections. I actually live in a very wealthy part of Florida. I mean, Stewart's got a lot of really mostly business owners actually all over Stewart. And just like so many connections that they have. And I'm like, you only have so many asks. Like, don't ask, like, if somebody's like, they want to help, and they're super curious and you only have so many asks. Like, don't ask them something that you could go on ChatGPT and find out. Don't ask them
Yeah,
something that you
exactly.
could go on Google and find out, right? Like, they're there to ask about like very, very like high level questions and they're overstatic to, answer those questions when it's like very high strategic, different options, stuff like that. But you'll burn out that connection super quick,
Totally. Totally.
otherwise. But I mean, even like I love, and I'm not any crazy high level, but I would say I'm above where other guys my age are.
100%.
I love like giving my opinion in different things, but then there's also a lot of people that I just feel like um, I don't even like searching out to give my opinion. Like I used to be like, oh, let me help you. Like, why are you doing this? I feel like you're wasting your time. Like you could do so much better if you did this on your own or something like that. And just like you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink, and bad advice falls on deaf ears. So I've kind of like backtracked, and now I don't like talking to people as much as I did and giving advice. But like the and I still like it's hard to find. But I say this as an encouragement to whoever's listening. Like if you're like really really serious and want to grow and have really good questions that are very like specific and not like broad, like hold my hand, that is in business. I feel like you would agree, Justin, would like want to help you in different
I
things or
do.
partner.
I totally agree. I
And
totally agree.
there's just so much opportunity out there. It's just unreal. All the guys that I've found that are, farther than me and stuff like that are just like willing, like, oh, like I see you got the drive. Let me help you. Let me help you with this. Let me help you with that.
Yep.
And it's just, it'll come to you if you go and are like serious about it and take action steps.
Yep.
That was
Yep.
just my
Totally
add on
agree.
to it.
And I was on Instagram Live this morning doing one, and I was taking a few questions and connecting with a few people. And there was a guy that came on from Ireland, and he's like, man, I switched paradigms, and I was struggling with this and this and this, and then I just started to change my perspective and put it out there. And he's like, now I'm just in the last 6 days, this happened and this happened and this happened. And he's going through a list of things where he's putting questions out to these other big names and he's getting feedback and things like he's just calling it divine providence. He's like, I can see God's hand moving this. He's like, man, why haven't I been asking for more? And that's what I think you're saying, John, is that there are all these people, so many of them are willing to do a lot to help. And I'm personally in every one of my DMs. That is me. I like being there. I don't delegate that at all. And when somebody gives me a question that's lazy, that doesn't even have, like, there's no, can you help me make more money? Sometimes I get, and it's, here's my YouTube video. Go check this out. Right. That's how I respond to those. But when somebody says, I've done this and I'm trying to accomplish this, and these are the things that are getting in my way, do you have advice for me? It's like, hang on. Yes, I'm going to get to work. And I start, and I get into it because I can tell they're really trying. They're really striving. And I'm not going to just send them over to some YouTube video. I'm going to see what I can apply. And that brings up an interesting concept that a lot of people will say, what would you do? Or what did you do? And that's different, maybe. And I learned this lesson, I remember, from a different mentor of mine, guy that I admired many years ago. I was trying to model him at that current stage. And I was 21 or 2, and I saw him making millions of dollars and running multiple companies. And I was trying to just model his behavior. And one day he was on a treadmill in his office, and he looks at me and goes, what the fuck are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm trying to be like you. Like, I'm doing a little bit of this on your project and this. And he's like, no, you idiot. Stop. He's like, I got to this point because I focused on one thing. I went very deep into that thing for the last 8 years. It's all I've done. And that gave me enough expertise and resources to hire Dave, who sits out there and runs the company. You know Dave, he signs your paycheck. He's the guy. And I'm like, yeah, Dave does pretty much everything. He's like, yeah, do you think? What do you think? I'm in here on a treadmill and he's out there taking care of the company. Because that's how I got to this point. So if you want what I have, you got to do what I did, not what I do. That's different, right? So when I grabbed my mentor and he was way up the mountain, he came down and showed me his path. I didn't just get to jump up there, but I went like so much faster up that mountain than I would have fumbling with my eyes closed on my own. He showed me the steps to take. He showed me where I needed to turn. He showed me where I needed to slow down. Showed me where I could speed up. And because of that expertise, I got results faster than I ever would have imagined.
That's super cool. What kind of advice do you feel like you wish you would have had kind of starting off in business?
Always write that check for speed. Like if we think we're saving a buck by not delegating or hiring it out or asking somebody for advice that's a professional. Usually, almost 100% of the time, I would say that it's always been more expensive for me to fumble my way through it. So if you have an opportunity to talk to, work with, get advice from somebody that's further ahead or that has a narrow expertise in an area that you need, get it. Don't be cheap, because that will pay. I've got another quick story on that. Like my wife crashed a vehicle of ours the day before we were going to turn in the lease, like at the end of the lease. And I was so bummed about it, but it just so happened the next day, like I was pissed. I was like, you're kidding me, man. This is crazy. And she was fine. Everything was no big deal. It just did like $18,000 of damage because it hit so many different parts of the vehicle on a snowy road. And the next day I had a meeting with my CPA. It just happened to be the next day. And I was telling him about it. I'm like, can you believe this crap? And because that meeting was on the books, and because I shared with him the context, he told me about this accelerated depreciation, which I didn't realize was going on, and that was going to sunset that year, and all these things. The short version of the story is I got out of that vehicle into a new vehicle, took delivery of the vehicle on December 31st of that year so that I could accelerate 100% of its purchase price, $79,000, on that year's taxes. It saved me tens of thousands of dollars. And had I not done that, if I would have been too cheap, or if I would have been like, I don't really have any questions, I think I'm going to skip that meeting. No, I was just getting on and telling him like the crazy shit that happened the day before. That was all. And he's like, wait. Do you think you could take like he was going nuts. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That kind of stuff happens regularly. So look for the opportunities. Yeah, they're out there. And that's one of the main things that I wish I would have just realized, that is always there for you to take advantage of. And the second thing I think is, there's areas that we have our expertise in that we try to stay more focused in, which I think is smart. But that does not mean to avoid or abandon the blind spots. And that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do. They think, I'm not really good with numbers, so they do this. I'm never looking at the numbers. It scares me. Okay? Like The reason I had a meeting with my CPA the next day because I'm one of those guys. I don't love the numbers, so I have a meeting with this guy 4 times a year. It doesn't matter. It's already on the calendar for this year. They're 4 times a year, and that's just what happens. We get together. There's 1 hour blocked, and usually I have some questions by then, because I know that it's coming up, and I start adding things to the Google Doc that's on that calendar invite. But I do that to make sure that I don't put my head in the sand, because that's usually what we do as entrepreneurs. We'll dive into the things that we like and we know. Like we dive crazy. We dive so crazy that most people, normal people, wouldn't understand why we just go into the unknown with such wild abandon. Yet it's numbers, or some people it might be sales. I know some software developers where it's like they're really good jumping into the code and solving the problems and taking care of the issues. But if it's getting on a sales call, it's like, nope, I'm gonna just schedule that for 3 weeks from now because they just avoid it. So I would say the second thing that I wish I would have known is that you don't have to be an expert to spend a little time. And by spending a little time systematically, you take years, like just an hour a quarter on something will pay dividends for you so that you know what's going on with your numbers or your sales or your whatever.
100%. I love that. I love that. Tell me a little bit about strategy when it comes to R&D for maybe a new business that you're wanting to start. Say you got, we'll kind of start like this kind of experiment here. I want to start kind of like, doing nothing, have a typical 9 to 5 somewhere else, wanting to be an entrepreneur, start something all the way up into, getting acquired. What kind of R&D does somebody need to do before they actually execute and start it?
Well, AI gives you a lot of resources to that end now that I think you can, if you're not leveraging that, and I would say if you're going to use AI, which everybody should use AI, everybody should use the chat models, you need to use your voice. Okay, don't try to type with your thumbs. You'll never give it enough context. You should see the prompt that I gave AI on my way home from work yesterday. I mean, it's literally, if I were to print it on paper, I bet it's 18 to 25 pages. So every prompt, I'm giving so much context to that prompt. And I don't like the one that talks back to me because it interrupts me while I'm trying to think. I just hit the microphone that turns my voice into text. Even if there's typos and stuff, it figures it out. So always use your voice and always give massive amounts of context. So if you're sitting there in your 9 to 5 and you're thinking like, what should I do? I want to get into this. Just start talking. Create a project, start talking, put some project support material in there. It will develop and help you evolve those thoughts very quickly. And it's fantastic for that kind of a task. I'd say you start with what lights you up, what you're passionate about, what you're naturally inclined to do. Those are good indicators that I think probably are coming from a higher power, right? Your interests, your passions, some of those desires and motivations will help you light that path. And then, well, I was on the founders hike that we had today. I mentioned that every Tuesday we go out and I invite any business owners in the area. That's where I am every Tuesday to get some steps in. And there was a woman there who told me about an idea that they had to do some services with senior citizens in this community and kind of give me the run through of the whole thing. So it's really just like your question. And her next comment was, what do you think? And what would my next steps be? So in other words, she's got a concept of an idea. It's just all in her head right now. And my advice to her was go sell it to 5 people. She's like, well, yeah, maybe I'll get the insurance and this. I'm like, no. Probably spend a few $100s, 20 hours a week, just putting that all together. You're going to have a mental model that is it's skewed from reality. And you will have convinced yourself further that this is a good idea because you've already put $500 into it, because you've already put 200 hours into it, or whatever it is, right? You're going to have these preconceived notions that are weighted now that if you just start today and you go out there and talk to the next, like everybody, you should talk to the people behind me in this hike and see if you could sell one of them. Like, just sell it 5 times. And I don't mean to your relatives, and I don't mean they say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I mean, get a check, get cash, get a Venmo, get that transaction. That's a really good way, because once you've done it 5 times to strangers, you now have a business. That's what I would say.
What's the next steps after that? you get 5 sales, you know it works, there's a good product market fit.
Well, it kind of depends on the business. If you have an idea that you've been able to make sales for, then now you need to just go deliver and execute. So in her case, she was talking about software, she was talking about insurance, she was talking about some matching services between this party and this party. So she already had an idea, and I think most people do. If you're at that stage, you kind of have this concept of, I'm thinking of this, and it could be that, and it could turn into this thing, and then maybe once I prove it in this market, it can go to other markets. So you have some ideas, but most people start working on those ideas. And I did this. I was in a software development company where I had a partner, and we had 2 or 3 different projects. Each of those projects lasted over a year of development. We were doing R&D and building something. This was years and years ago. We'd build stuff before we ever made a sale. And what sucks about that is people would show up to a meeting where we'd do a little sprint review every 30 days or so. And we'd talk about the features, the bugs, and then somebody would say, what would be really cool is if it could do this. And then they'd spend the next 60 to 90 days building all those features into it. More money, more money, more money, more money. Then we'd get in sales rooms to have conversations, and there was no sales. Like, never made a sale on the product. Eventually, abandoned the product. $100,000 later, and you're abandoning the product. Like, that scope creep, that happens. That's real. That's sunk cost. So if you don't know what the next steps of a business are, again, it depends on the business. I don't know that I would ever be in that situation to not have an idea of what my business intentions were. But again, if you've proven that it's a model that works, then it becomes execution. So what's the theory of constraints say? What am I missing here? So if it's literally you just made 5 sales and now you're like, okay, what do I do next? I think this is valid. I would probably go to leads, right? Can I create demand through marketing, through content, through conversations, through knocking on doors, whatever? Can I generate enough interest to see if this is scalable? As soon as you generate that, then you're going to have some sales problems. Once you generate sales problems, then you're going to have delivery problems. And when you have that's the thing. A lot of people start a business thinking that they're romantic about it, and we think, we're like MacGyver. We're going to take a piece of duct tape and a paper clip and a stick of gum, and we're going to solve every problem that you've ever had. And you may be able to solve all those problems, but to think you're going to do it without facing and overcoming problems is crazy, because you are going to have problems. And running a business means going into the unknown. And you may wake up one day and find out you're dealing with a pandemic now that totally changes everything that you thought was normal. And in that case, put on your MacGyver gloves. This is what you signed up for, is to go out into the unknown, to solve a problem, to pivot when the data says you need to pivot. So that's kind of what I would say is next step is follow the theory of constraints.
Tell me about, for this next phase, we'll talk about a little more about your business, because you talked about you were doing 300K. You had your mentor come down, kind of walk you through 300K to $1 million. What exactly did you do that changed to get that from the 300 to $1 million? Was it a sales issue? Was it a operations issue?
No, it was a bandwidth issue. So the primary thing that changed is I stopped trying to do everything myself. And that was probably the big thing. I began to realize that my time was becoming more and more valuable. And I didn't do that off just some theory or some talk or some little powwow, like the rah-rah meeting. I looked at the numbers and I saw that it was going up. But then I tried to look closer at the numbers and I realized I didn't have really good numbers. Step 1 is bringing somebody in to catch up my numbers, because I was falling behind. So John, I'm trying to build this business, and invoicing starts to get behind, and then the end of the year is coming up soon. And I know I'm going to have a tax situation. So in this particular case, what I did is I followed some advice in that case to stop worrying about sending invoices. Okay, so I made a deal with my mentor at that point that they were going to come in with some of their team who had accountants and CPAs and all kinds of people that were going to help me get it fixed up. But for now, the best thing for my tax strategy is to pay all my bills, because this was in November, right? So I had a couple months of the year left. Pay all my bills. Don't collect any of the money, which is risky, but this was the risk I was taking. And then wait and send all the invoices the first part of January. And if people call and say like, hey, I haven't heard anything from you, just be like, I'm behind, just wait, I'll get to it as soon as I can. And that happened. I did. And I was scared to death because I thought, dude, these balances are getting really big and I don't even know exactly how much, but I know they're freaking high and I'm paying out all my bills and everything as if all the money's coming in. So I'm watching the bank account balance go $100,000, $80,000, $60,000, $27,000. And I'm like, so what that did is it made my year on a cash basis, right? As I'm filing my tax return on a cash basis because I was small, it made my year profits dwindle at the end. But then what happened is I'm just kind of pushing and deferring the tax liability into the following year. So then January goes out and all these invoices, they hit the market and they flood 2 months worth of collections now come in. But I still don't know what my numbers are, right? And so I'm trying to figure it out. While this is happening, I'm also working with my mentor on what I should be doing. The main thing that I did differently is what I didn't do anymore. I didn't screw around with QuickBooks on Sunday. I did not screw around with cleaning the office. I did not try to deal with little tracking issues and technology issues. I left those for somebody else. And probably the biggest, this was before there wasn't really much for smartphones back then. I had a little recording device that was about the size of, maybe a little bigger than this. It was an MP3 recorder. And I sat down to look at my emails because the volume of my emails, I had all of my vendors replying to me. I had all of my clients emailing me. That was my primary source, that and instant message and stuff. And I began recording with my voice responses to those emails. So I'd start at the bottom and I'd go up to the top. And I would just record, pause, stop, do it again, record. And then I handed that to my assistant and I said, there's the emails. And then I went about my day. I could process 60, 70, 80 emails in 90 minutes as opposed to 4 hours. So I got back 2 or 3 hours every day doing that. With those 2 or 3 hours every day, I was able to fit in 1 or 2 new trips to land a new client. So I'd hop on a plane and run to Florida. And then I'd come back. I'd do that on Thursday. I'd come back on Saturday. I'd miss most of Thursday and all of Friday in the office. But then, on the weekend, I'd fly back on Saturday and I'd get home and I was back with my family. And then I'd have Sunday and Monday to be with my family. And not do QuickBooks, mind you, like I was doing before on Sunday. So that began to shift where my time was going exponentially. And I went from pulling these levers that still needed to be pulled, right? On Sunday, somebody had to do the QuickBooks at some point. But I stopped pulling them on Sunday and instead used that time to be with my family and to connect with them and to build some of the things back I needed to take care of there. And then on Monday, I felt better because now I'm not abandoning the family. I had more balance in life. So now I show up Monday ready to work in the afternoon. I'd take the morning off and hang out with the kids. Come in the afternoon, I'm ready to work. I'm full of I'm fired up now. Having just come off the trip, landed a new client on Friday, spent the weekend with my family. And now Monday afternoon, I show up to work, record a bunch of emails from Thursday, Friday, over the weekend, hand it to my assistant, and then go about more work. So the time that I was spending, and this is what he was teaching me, is I was pulling levers that were worth $10,000, $50,000, $100,000. The levers over here that I was pulling all weekend or at night and typing emails every morning, because usually it was mornings for 3 hours just to respond to emails from yesterday when I was on calls and doing other things, gone. That I would get done quickly. I'd pass along to somebody else, and they would take care of it. And so I no longer pulled the $10 levers. Somebody else was doing that. And they were getting paid $10 an hour to do that. So by simply shifting strategically and in the right sequence, John, that's where I almost screwed up. I was able to get back a significant amount of time that I used to land more deals and bigger deals. One of those deals turned into a massive deal that made me $5 million over the next two years probably. But more than that is it was a catalyst that opened doors to a lot of other deals that I didn't even, because it started to create a reputation and it started to create goodwill. I started putting things out there that I didn't even know were possible. But so it's, again, the sequencing of things. Like I pushed over the right domino, the first domino in order, and that just kept trickling down and hitting more and more dominoes by doing it with the right sequence.
That's awesome. That's super awesome. going from there, you did 1 million to 2 million in a month, and that was just kind of same processes. You hit your million, and then within the next month, you hit your next million.
I did, and that's
Pretty much because of the same kind of track.
it was because of landing some of these accounts, and now they were starting to take off, right? And the volume was catching up. And what was cool about it is I remember that moment because I told you my numbers weren't really in place, and then this mentor of mine came into me one day in April, I think the end of April, and yeah, it was right about the end of April because I remember the tax rush season had been passed already, like that was in the rear view. And he's like, hey, just so you know, I want you to see something. And he showed me a spreadsheet. He's like, you've officially just reached millionaire status. You've made your first $1 million. I'm like, no. And then he shows me the number. He's like, these are the months. This is the income. These are the expenses. And it was kind of like a P&L basic breakdown. And he showed me the expenses and things that went on. He's like, your net profit total year to date was 1 million and some change. I was like, wow. And then he said to me, he's like, watch what happens next. He's like, that's the hardest part because you get in your own way. And so much of it is the 6 inches between your ears that's keeping you from it. But now that you know that it's possible, and not just possible, it's in your bank account. And it literally was. Like the balances were, I told you it was like 6 figures before, and now I'm seeing it like just all those invoices coming in and everything. And I'm like, wow. And I started to feel a little bit rich. I was like, whoa, this is pretty insane. Man, this is totally cool. I love this. And he's like, it'll happen. The next one will be, and it was like a month, maybe 5 weeks. I mean, it was so close. And then with all those resources, we brought in more people. And again, that reputation started to take off really quickly. It's like, wow, you got those results for those people. What could you do for us? And then it became a theory of constraints. It was, we need to be really selective about who we work with. So we got to stand back now and choose our opportunities. And man, when you get to that position, that's why by the end of that year, it was multiple millions because we looked at the opportunities that were coming our way for work. And we got to select the very best clients to work with, the vendors that we were outsourcing some of the work to. It's like, we're only going to work with the very, very best because they only wanted to work with us. Like, it continued to grow and get easier. And I was like, holy shit, man, this guy was right. It was as soon as I passed the first threshold, the mental barrier, then it just became easier because all these outside external forces seemed to just like line up and fall down like easily compared to what it was like for the couple years before that, which was just like grind. There's no more of that. It's all about sequencing, John. It literally is. It's about doing things in the right order because if I go back in time and I do all that with all the same people, with all the same stuff, but I start in the wrong order, I do the wrong thing, what I'm going to do is take that great opportunity, that great client or clients, and bring them in 2 or 3 months too soon. When I don't have the process dialed in with my account, with my assistant, just to manage those 3 hours a day of emails. So now I bring in a new client. I'm trying to juggle emails. I got my kids that need some time. I got this going on. I got that going on. And I spend the 3 hours a day. And then I get back to my client a day later than usual. And now they're not happy. Instead of just them growing and blowing up with me, they say, you're kind of slow getting back to it. Like, do you see these silly little things? Because I didn't do them out of sequence, they just stacked and they gave me compound returns. You do them the wrong way around, you miss an opportunity, it goes somewhere else. And I can give you 1,000 stories just like that. Like again and again and again, how that sequence saved it all.
That's awesome. What was your next kind of plateau after that?
I think technology was a big thing for us back then. We hit a point where it was hard to do more because of technology limitations. And this is there was no Google Cloud, there's no Amazon AWS, so we're driving a lot of traffic through different advertising campaigns, and that was something that the traffic, we're starting to get millions of views a day, and nobody, it was a blind spot. Like, I had no idea that you need a lot of robust servers structure to handle that kind of traffic. So we'd have servers. I remember one day waking up at, I stayed up late to do things when it was quiet in the office. I get up at like 10 or 11 and I realized there's all these text messages and emails and missed phone calls that a server had gone down at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Tons of traffic is trying to access this server. There's nothing there but a 404 error, and everybody's going bananas. Like it's all berserk. And that was, I didn't have the people, I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the backup systems in place. So that became one of the big constraints that we had to solve. So that's where we added a lot of payroll dollars in the coming months for high tech people to come in and help. Yeah, because I couldn't, like, I had no idea. Like servers, okay. I mean, what, I kind of get the gist of what a server does and what it is, but I had no idea what I was dealing with.
Man, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Justin, I really appreciate the time that you've spent. I think this was like really, really golden information. I think there's more to do, so maybe we'll have to do a second podcast in the future.
Cool. Yeah, I'm game.
Give us some shout outs, give us some plugs. How can we get in contact with you?
I'd love to have you guys come and contact me. If you have any questions that I can help with, come find me on Instagram. It's probably the best place. That's where we put content out the most frequently. We're putting something out there at least every day, maybe a couple times a day. And it's Justin Lund is the Instagram handle. And it's me in the DMs. So, I mean, I'm there. I love connecting with people. That's why I do this. I have a mission, John, that I feel my path and my story from jail to rehab to building a multi-million-dollar company that I didn't even, dude, I didn't deserve it. Like I don't have the background to really reach that level. Then it's been full of good, bad, ugly. And I know that there's a lot of really great people that are entrepreneurs out there that are struggling through things that a little bit of an unlock, a small paradigm change, maybe just a question answered like we were talking about earlier. And if I can help you do that, I feel like that's me responding to that calling that I have now. So I'd love to hear from you. Come on over and check it out. We're on YouTube and Instagram, Twitter. We're on all of them, but Instagram is probably the easiest one for us to communicate with and where we put out the most content.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, guys, go give Justin a follow at It's Justin Lund. So thank you guys again so much for watching. Justin, I'm gonna do the outro. Just don't hang up when I say bye. Thank you guys so much for listening. This is the $100 million podcast. Our $100 million guest of the day was Justin. Really appreciate you, Justin, for coming on. If you guys find value in this content, please subscribe, like the video, and share this with somebody that you think would find value in this content. Also, put any comments down below, and we'll do our best to get back to you. And appreciate you guys. Have a good one. See you next time.